My father's office always smelled of oak, leather, and lemon polish. This smell has haunted me since childhood, a solid, heavy aroma of power and money. Today, it was mixed with another smell, the smell of betrayal. Warren Tate, my father, sat behind his massive desk, radiating the same unwavering confidence with which he had run his construction empire for 30 years. His graying temples and deep wrinkles around his eyes only emphasized the severity of his gaze. Those blue eyes, just like mine, were now looking right through me, as if I were just another inconvenient problem in his schedule. Abby, I've decided to sell the lake house. His voice sounded casual, as if he were announcing a change of dinner plans. My stomach dropped to the bottom. The cottage on Lake Windermere, our family refuge, the place where I spent every summer of my childhood, the place where my mother, Audrey, planted roses and wrote her poetry on the wooden veranda. What do you mean, sold? My voice trembled treacherously. When? Last week. The deal is already finalized. He pulled out some paper from his desk drawer, completely calm, as if he wasn't about to destroy my world. 2 million. The real estate market is booming. 2 million. He said it as if he had just changed the supplier in the office, the Dacha my mother had promised me before she died. This will be your place, Abby. I promise it will always be your home, she said, holding my hands with her already thin fingers as the cancer took the last of her strength. You had no right, I whispered, feeling anger rising in my chest. Mom wanted me to have the dacha. You know that. My father raised an eyebrow. Verbal promises, Abby? Really? The house was in my name. Your mother could have said anything in her. He hesitated for a moment. In her condition. In her state. That was how he now called her dying days, as if her wishes and words were just the ramblings of a dying woman. 5 years had passed and he still couldn't say when she was dying. She was in her right mind, and you know it, I said through gritted teeth. That's enough. He put the check in front of me. $14,000. I could have given you nothing, but you're still my daughter. I looked at that piece of paper, not believing my eyes. 14,000 out of 2 million, less than 1%. It wasn't even a handout. It was humiliation. What is this? I asked, not touching the check. Your share, he answered, leaning back in his chair. It would be wise if you used the money to rent something decent. Away from here. Away from here. Away from him. From the memories. Everything that connected me to my mom. I looked up and met his cold gaze. I felt the corners of my lips involuntarily lift in a smile. Something funny, Abigail? He used my full name, as he always did when he was irritated. No, Dad. It's just the irony of life. I took the check with 2 fingers, as if it were something dirty. You didn't even ask me if I wanted to keep this house. Why ask the obvious? It's not about the money. It's always about the money, Abby. He pressed a button on his phone. His secretary confirmed, and I realized that the audience was over. Typical Warren Tate. Business before everything, especially feelings. I stood up, still holding the check. Okay, Dad, whatever you say. He didn't even look up from his paperwork. The decision's been made, Abby. Just accept it and move on. As I left his office, I felt my heart pounding with anger and relief. A strange kind of relief, because he really didn't know what I had done a few days ago. 2 days before this meeting. The old attic floor of my apartment. Boxes of my mother's things that I hadn't dared to sort through in 5 years. I finally decided to do it, to say goodbye to the past, to turn the page. In a dusty box labeled Documents, I found a blue folder with the emblem of the law firm Gardner, Pratt and Partners. Inside was a will, not a copy, but an original with a wet seal and my mother's signature, dated 2 months before her death. I bequeath the summer house on Lake Windermere, Maine, together with the surrounding 5 acres, to my only daughter, Abigail Lauren Tate. I sat on the floor among the boxes, reading the document over and over again with trembling hands. Tears blurred my vision. She had taken care of it. She took care of me. Why hadn't my father ever mentioned this will? The answer was obvious, and it broke my heart once again. The Blue Ivy Cafe has been Brooke's and my meeting place since college. Brooke Fenton is the only person from my past with whom I still keep in touch, and the only one who could help me now. Brooke almost spat out her latte when I showed her the check. 14,000? Really? That's not even enough for rent in our city for a year. Her indignation was like a balm to my soul. At least someone understood the absurdity of the situation. He sold the house for $2 million, Brooke. $2 million, and he didn't even bother to call me first. Brooke tossed her brown hair back. At 35, she was already one of the most successful real estate attorneys in our town. Her sharp mind, sharp tongue, and absolute commitment to justice made her a great friend and a terrible adversary. Did your mother really say that the cottage should go to you? Yes, many times, especially in the last few months. She wanted to be sure that I would have a place, not just a place, a refuge. My mother knew my father better than anyone. She knew his ability to control everything, to turn everything into a business decision. But without a written will, Brooke began. I pulled a blue folder out of my bag and placed it on the table. Brooke froze, staring at the law firm's logo. Then she turned her gaze to me, her green eyes widening. Abby, is that what I think it is? I nodded, feeling my lips stretch again in the same smile that had so puzzled my father. My mother's original will, dated 2 months before she died, legally certified with all the seals, completely legal. Brooke opened the folder carefully, skimmed the first page, and whistled softly. I bequeath the summer house on Lake Windermere to my only daughter, Abigail Lauren Tate. Oh my God, Abby. She flipped through the pages, her professional eye picking out the key points. 2 witnesses, a notary. She looked at me. Where did you find this? In boxes of Mom's things, in the attic of my apartment. I finally decided to go through them. And your father never mentioned this will? I shook my head, feeling bitterness rise to my throat. Never, not a word. And now he sold the house, and he gave me this. I pushed the check across the table. Brooke leaned back, her face serious. You know what this means, right? That he hid the will. My voice was quiet but firm. That he knew about Mom's wishes and deliberately ignored them. And that he had no right to sell the house, Brooke added. By law, if the will is valid, the house belonged to you when your mother died. The sale is void. I remembered the last days with my mom. We were sitting on the veranda of the lake house, watching the sun slowly sink behind the pine trees. Her hand in mine, so light, almost weightless. Promise me that you will come here whenever you are struggling, Abby. This place has the power to heal souls. I want it back, Brooke, I said, feeling determination fill me with every word. I want my mom's house back. And I want my father to explain why he hid her will. Brooke nodded, her eyes flashing with professional excitement. We'll file a lawsuit to void the sale on the grounds that the seller didn't have title, and a separate one for willful concealment of the will. It won't be easy, Abby. Your father is a powerful man. He'll hire the best lawyers. And I have you, I smiled weakly. And you have the truth on your side, Brooke took my hand. Look, are you sure you're ready for this? It means going to war with your father, a public, dirty war. I remembered his indifferent look as he handed me the check. Go live far away from here. after everything we had been through, after my mom's death, after years of trying to be a good daughter. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Brooke squeezed my hand. Then we need to act fast. We need to stop the transfer of ownership to the new buyers, if it's still possible. Do you know who they are? I shook my head. Dad didn't tell me. But the sale took place only last week. Maybe we'll have time. I hope so, Brooke nodded. In the meantime, don't tell Dad you found the will. The element of surprise will be to our advantage. I remembered his face when I smiled instead of crying, that moment of confusion in his eyes. He was used to my tears, to my bending to his will. Don't worry, I said, finishing my coffee. He has no idea what's coming. The sun shone through the cafe window, casting a golden light on our table. For the first time in 5 years, I felt like I was breathing freely. It was as if my mother was there, whispering, "Fight, my girl. Fight for what is yours." And I was ready to fight for the house, for my mother's memory, and for myself. My mother's diary was lying in front of me, an inconspicuous notebook in worn brown leather. It was strange that I hadn't found it earlier, among all those boxes. Maybe I just wasn't ready. My fingers gently stroked the initials embossed on the cover, OMT-Audrey Margaret Tate. I opened the first page. My mother's handwriting was elegant, with a characteristic leftward slant. The date is June 23rd, exactly 20 years ago. Windy Cove has become my refuge. Warren won't be here for the weekend again. Something urgent with a new project. Abby is upset, but I'm going to arrange a wonderful day at the lake for her. Just the two of us. Today we caught fireflies at dusk and made a wish. My little dreamer wants to become a mermaid. Maybe we all need a little magic. Windy Cove is how my mom called our house on the lake. Officially, this place didn't even have a name. It was just part of the shore of Lake Windermere. But for us, it was a special world with its own laws and traditions. I turned the pages, immersed in my mother's thoughts. Year after year, a story unfolded, not the one I knew as a child. My mother described how she was gradually moving away from my father, how he was becoming more and more immersed in his work, colder and more controlling. Warren thinks my poetry is nonsense. He said it was a waste of time when I could be doing something productive, as if raising a child wasn't productive enough. I sipped my tea, looking out the window of my apartment. The rain drummed on the glass, creating the perfect backdrop for a trip back in time. It always seemed to me that my parents had just drifted apart. A typical story. He plunged into business, she into raising a child. But the diary revealed a deeper, more painful truth. Today, I told Warren that I wanted to spend the whole of July at the lake with Abby. He objected, saying that I was spoiling my daughter, that she needed discipline, not a carefree summer. We had another fight. He doesn't understand that the lake house is the only place where I can breathe, the only place where I feel like myself. Only now did I truly understand why my mother loved our Dacha so much. It wasn't just a vacation. It was an escape, her space of freedom from my father's control and judgment. I turned the pages, and my heart sank as I realized how little I knew about my mother's true feelings. I remembered our summers at the lake, carefree days filled with laughter, swimming, and evenings by the fire. My father rarely joined us, usually for a weekend, sometimes not even for all of them, always with the phone in his hand, always half present. There was a photo in my diary of my mother and me on the pier, our feet in the water, the sunset casting the lake in gold. I was about 10 at the time. We are smiling, our hair blowing in the wind. On the back is my mother's handwriting. My happiest moments are always here, with her. I clutched the photo to my chest, feeling tears gathering in the corners of my eyes. My mother created a little paradise for me, protecting me from my father's coldness. And now he sold this paradise without even blinking an eye. The worst part was reading the notes after he met Veronica. I was 15 at the time. Warren brought his new assistant for the weekend. Veronica is young, attractive, and looks at him with eyes full of admiration. It's nothing new, but this time it's different. He looks at her like he hasn't looked at me in a long time. Abby hated her immediately. My smart girl feels everything. I remembered that weekend. Veronica showed up at our lake house in white shorts and a pink top, with perfect manicure and hair that miraculously remained flawless even after swimming. She was 20 years younger than my father, only 10 years older than I, and she truly looked up to him with adoration, his status, his money, his power. Less than a year later, my parents officially divorced. A year later, Veronica became the new Mrs. Tate. 3 years later, my mom was diagnosed with cancer. I kept flipping through the diary, gritting my teeth in pain and anger. In recent years, the entries became less frequent and shorter as the disease took away my mother's strength. But even then, her thoughts often returned to the lake house. I told my oncologist that my dream was to spend my last summer in Windy Cove. He was so kind. He said he would do everything he could to make me feel well enough to do that. Abby promised to take a vacation to be with me. My beautiful girl. Now she is taking care of others in the hospice. Does she realize that she chose this job to somehow cope with what is happening to me? To give meaning to the suffering? My mom was right. That's why I became a hospice nurse, to understand how to accompany her on her last journey, so that I would not be afraid of death when it comes for the dearest person. My career choice was my way of coping with the indescribable, with the fact that I was losing my mother. The last recordings were made in Windy Cove, where we finally arrived that summer, despite all the doctor's predictions. Mom was extremely weak, but full of a kind of inner light and peace that I had never noticed before. Today, I watched Abby swimming in the lake. The sun was creating a halo around her wet hair. She is so strong, my daughter, stronger than she knows, stronger than her father ever allowed her to be. He always wanted an obedient, comfortable child, but she has fire in her, my blood. One day she will realize that. I wiped away my tears. My mother saw in me a strength that I did not notice in myself. All my life I tried to please my father, to earn his approval and attention. As a nurse, I chose a profession of care and compassion, the exact opposite of his world of ambition and competition. Perhaps I subconsciously hoped that this would bring us closer, that he would see value in my choice. But Warren Tate only valued success and money. My modest nurse's salary was proof of my unrealized potential, as he liked to say. With your mind, Abby, you could run a clinic, not just work in one. He never realized that I didn't want to run. I wanted to help, to hold the hand of the dying, to give hope to those who were losing it, to do exactly what I did for my mother in her last days. The doorbell rang. I put down my diary and went to answer it, wiping tears from my eyes. Aunt Peyton, my mother's younger sister, a slender woman with the same brown eyes and warm smile as my mother, stood on the doorstep. Oh, honey. She hugged me, sensing my condition. What happened? I silently led her into the living room, where the open diary and will lay on the table. Warren sold the lake house, I said, watching her face change from shock to anger. He did what? Her voice was sharp as a razor. Audrey, I know. I pointed to the will. I found this a few days ago. Mom left the house to me. Legally, it belonged to me for the 5 years after she died. Aunt Peyton slowly sank down onto the couch, her face pale. Audrey told me she changed her will. I witnessed. She put her hand over her mouth. Oh my God, Abby. That means Warren hid the will. Deliberately. I nodded, feeling the anger rise again. And now he's sold the house for $2 million and given me $14,000. Like a handout. Aunt Peyton clenched her fists, a rare display of anger for this normally calm woman. Typical of him, always controlling everything, always deciding for others. She shook her head. Your mother fought so hard for this house after the divorce. I looked at her in surprise. What do you mean? My aunt sighed. Your father wanted to sell the lake house during the divorce. He said it was a waste of money to keep such a large house that was only used for a few months of the year. But Audrey? Aunt Peyton smiled sadly. Your mother was willing to give up most of the marital estate to keep Windy Cove. I didn't know, I whispered. Of course you didn't know. They both shielded you from the sordid details of the divorce. But your mother fought like a lioness for that house. My aunt took my hand. Abby, there's something you need to know. The lake house. It was never really community property. I frowned. What do you mean? Your mother bought it with money she inherited from her parents. Your grandparents, Margaret and Robert. They saved that money for Audrey her whole life. They sold their farm in Iowa when they retired. She used the money as a down payment and paid the rest from her account. Technically, your father added his name to the paperwork later when they took out a joint mortgage, but the down payment, 60% of the cost, was entirely your mother's. I felt my heart pounding. This explained why my mother had fought so desperately for the house. It wasn't just real estate, it was her legacy, her connection to her own parents. Why didn't she ever tell me about it? Aunt Peyton shrugged. Your mother didn't like to talk about money. She was an idealist, believed in love and beauty, not contracts and bills. That was one of the reasons why she and Warren couldn't be together in the end. They were too different. She picked up the will from the table, studying it carefully. You know, Audrey changed it secretly. She didn't tell Warren. She called me one day and asked me to go with her to the notary. She said, we need to secure Abby's future. She knew Abby. She knew that Warren would try to control everything even after her death. Tears came to my eyes again. My mom, quiet, poetic, gentle, had more strength than I thought. She fought for me until her last breath. Now I understand why my father never mentioned a will, I said bitterly. He just ignored my mother's last will, as if her wishes didn't matter. Your father always thought he knew best, Aunt Peyton replied, even when he was wrong, especially then. She looked at the photographs lined up next to the diary. Audrey loved that house so much, and you, Abby, more than anything. She wanted you to have a place where you could be yourself, away from Warren's control, his judgment. I nodded as I gathered the photos. You know, I spent my whole life trying to earn his approval. To be a good daughter. I did everything right. I studied hard, didn't cause any problems, chose a profession where I help others. And still, it was never enough. Because it's not about you, sweetheart. Aunt Peyton stroked my cheek gently. It's about him. His inability to appreciate what doesn't fit his idea of success. He never understood your mother or you. Something in her words struck a deep chord in my soul. All my life I blamed myself. I thought that if I were smarter, more successful, stronger, my father would love me more. But maybe it wasn't about me. Maybe I was just reminding him of a part of his life he wanted to forget. A marriage that had broken down, a wife who had confronted him, emotions he couldn't control. What are you going to do? My aunt asked. Fight, I answered firmly. I already talked to Brooke. Do you remember her? My friend, she's a lawyer now. We're filing a lawsuit. That house is mine, and I'm going to prove it. Aunt Peyton smiled proudly, with a hint of her mother's smile at the corners of her lips. You're finally fighting for yourself instead of trying to please him. I hugged her, breathing in the familiar scent. The same perfume my mother loved, lavender and vanilla. Thank you for telling me the truth. The truth is powerful, Abby. She pulled away, looking into my eyes. And that's why your father is so afraid of it. That's why he hid the will. After Aunt Peyton left, I went back to my mom's diary. I flipped through the pages until I found the last entry, written with a trembling hand, but with the same determination that was felt in every word. I changed my will today. Windy Cove will belong to Abby, only to her. It's my last gift to my daughter, a place where she can find herself when I'm gone, a place free of Warren's expectations. I see a strength in her that she hasn't yet recognized in herself. One day she will stand up for herself, and when that day comes, I will be there, in the whisper of the waves, in the rustle of the leaves, in the sunlight over the lake. I clutched the diary to my chest. My mother believed in me. She believed that one day I would find the strength to resist my father. And that day has come. The Howard and Associates real estate office looked exactly as I expected. Expensive leather chairs, paintings of New England landscapes on the walls, and the smell of money in the air. Dexter Howard, the city's leading realtor, greeted Brooke and I with a professional smile that began to fade as Brooke explained the purpose of our visit. "Let me get this straight," he said, taking off his glasses. "You're saying that Mr. Tate had no right to sell the house on Lake Windermere?" "That's right." Brooke placed a copy of the will on the table. "According to Audrey Tate's last will and testament, the house belongs to her daughter, Abigail. The original will was hidden by Mr. Tate for 5 years." Dexter blinked several times, as if trying to digest the information. He was a tall man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and a tan that could only be obtained on a golf course. "This is a serious accusation," he finally said. "Warren Tate is a respected man in our town." "A respected man who hid his late wife's will," Brooke countered. "We've already filed a lawsuit to void the sale. But before we go to court, I'd like to know the details of the transaction." Dexter looked at me, his eyes a mixture of sympathy and professional caution. "Ms. Tate, are you sure you want to go down this road?" "Your father?" "My father sold a house that wasn't his," I interrupted him, "and gave me $14,000 out of a $2 million deal. I am very confident in my decision, Mr. Howard." He sighed and opened a folder on his computer. "Who initiated the sale?" Brooke asked. "When did Mr. Tate first approach you?" Dexter looked at the documents on the screen. "Veronica Tate first called me about 3 months ago. She said she and her husband were considering selling the lake house. Warren contacted me a week later to discuss the details. I clenched my fists. Of course, Veronica. She'd always hated the house, the last memory of my mother in my father's life. Did they give a reason for the sale?" Brooke continued. "Veronica said it had become an unnecessary burden. Something about the high maintenance costs and how they rarely used it." Dexter shrugged. "Warren confirmed that later, although he seemed less determined." "Less determined?" I asked again. "Yeah," Dexter nodded. "In fact, he postponed the preliminary agreement twice. He said he wanted to think it over again, but in the end, Veronica convinced him." I exchanged a look with Brooke. This was important information. My father hesitated. Maybe deep down inside he knew he was doing the wrong thing. "Who are the buyers?" I asked. "The Gardners from Boston." They were looking for a summer home and fell in love with Windermere at first sight. Dexter allowed himself a slight smile. "When is the final transfer of ownership scheduled?" Brooke pulled out her notebook. "In 3 days. Friday, 10 in the morning." My stomach clenched. "Only 3 days. Thank you for the information, Mr. Howard." Brooke closed her notebook. "I advise you to notify the parties of our lawsuit and the possibility of voiding the agreement." When we stepped outside, I took a deep breath of the cool autumn air. Veronica, I said, of course it is. No wonder, Brooke nodded. Your stepmother has always been a difficult figure. But that's good news for us. If your father hesitated, maybe he'll admit his mistake in court. Don't count on it, I shook my head. That night I decided to visit the Dacha, perhaps for the last time. The drive took 2 hours, and when I arrived at the familiar bend with the pine trees, the moon was already high above the lake, reflecting in the dark water with a silver path. The house looked the same as it always did, a wooden two-story cottage with a wide veranda that opened onto the water. My mother's roses still grew along the fence, although they needed care. I opened the door with the spare key I always kept. Inside, it smelled of dust and closed space. For 5 years, my father and I had hardly used the house. It was too painful to be here without my mother. But now, standing in the middle of the living room, I felt her presence more acutely than anywhere else. Moonlight fell through the windows, illuminating the contours of the familiar furniture. The old piano in the corner where my mother taught me to play. Bookshelves filled with her favorite poets. The fireplace where we used to sit on cold evenings, wrapped in blankets. I went to the window, looking out at the lake. How many times had I stood here with my mother, watching the sunset? How many secrets had we shared? How many dreams had we discussed? Abby? A voice behind me made me jump. A man stood in the doorway, tall, strongly built, with dark tousled hair. He held a flashlight in one hand and what looked like a baseball bat in the other. "Who are you?" I asked, backing up against the wall. "Finn Darnell," he answered, lowering the bat. "I live next door." I saw the lights on and decided to check it out. No one has been here lately. Finn Darnell. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "I'm Abigail Tate," I said. "This used to be our house." His eyes widened in surprise. "Abby? Oh my God!" He set the bat against the wall. "I haven't seen you in, what? 5 years. You knew my mother," I suddenly remembered. "You helped her with the garden that last summer." He nodded, smiling warmly. "Your mother was a wonderful woman. I moved here 6 years ago and didn't know many people. Audrey was the first person to invite me to tea. Slowly, carefully, as if afraid to stir up memories, Finn told me how he had become friends with my mother during her last summer, how he helped her tend the garden when she was too weak, how they talked for hours on the veranda, looking out over the lake. "She talked about you a lot," he said. "She was very proud of you." Tears came to my eyes, and I quickly wiped them away. "My father sold the house," I said. Finn frowned. "But wasn't the house supposed to go to you?" Audrey mentioned that. My heart sank. What exactly did she say? That she changed the will. That she wanted to make sure you got the house. He rubbed his chin. "Actually, she gave me something to keep. She said it was insurance." "Insurance? Wait here," Finn said, and disappeared into the darkness. He returned 10 minutes later, holding a sealed envelope. "Audrey gave this to me shortly before the end. She said that if you were ever in trouble or needed proof of her intentions for the house, I should give it to you." With trembling hands, I opened the envelope. Inside was a notarized copy of the same will that I had found in my mother's belongings. But not only that, there was also a letter written in my mother's hand. "My dear Abby, if you are reading this, it means you needed this document. I have changed the will to protect your future and your right to our special haven. The lake house was bought with my parents' money, and I wanted to stay in our family, with you. I know your father, his pride, his stubbornness, his belief that he always knows what is best. I'm afraid he might try to control your life even after I'm gone. Don't let him. You are stronger than you think. Love always, Mom." Tears flowed freely down my cheeks. My mother had foreseen everything, even the possibility that my father would try to hide the will. Thank you, I whispered to Finn. You have no idea how important this is. The next day, Brooke and I were sitting in the conference room of the law firm Gardner, Pratt and Associates, the same firm that had drafted Mom's will. Dad walked in with Veronica and his lawyer, Martin Shaw, a gray-haired man with a shark's grin. Abigail? Dad nodded, taking a seat across from us. I have an important meeting at 12. Important meeting, Dad? I asked with feigned concern. More important than you illegally selling the house that belongs to me? His face tensed, but he remained calm. Brooke laid the original will on the table. Mr. Tate, according to your late wife's last will and testament, the lake house on Windermere has been your daughter's since Audrey Tate's death. You had no legal right to sell it. Veronica leaned forward, her red fingernails tapping the table. This is ridiculous. Actually, no, I replied, pulling out my mother's letter and handing it to my father. The house was bought with my mother's parents' money, and she changed her will 2 months before she died. I watched my father read the letter. His face was expressionless, but I noticed his knuckles turning white. Where did you find this? He asked, not looking up. In Mom's things. The original will. Right where you left it, hoping I'd never go through her boxes. I leaned forward. But it's not the only copy, Dad. Mom anticipated that you might try to hide the truth. She left a certified copy with Finn Darnell, our neighbor across the lake. Now my father looked at me. For the first time in a long time, he really looked at me, as if he saw someone new. We've already filed a lawsuit to invalidate the sale, Brooke continued in a businesslike tone, and we're preparing a separate lawsuit for willful concealment of the will, which is a felony. Martin Shaw cleared his throat. These are serious allegations without sufficient evidence. We have evidence, I interrupted, pointing to the will, and witnesses. Aunt Peyton was present when Mom changed her will, and Finn Darnell got a copy from my mother personally. Veronica gave me an angry look. That old barn should have been torn down a long time ago. It was just eating up the maintenance money. We'll discuss this in private, her father interrupted her abruptly, showing irritation for the first time. He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something I had never seen before: uncertainty. To drag your mother's name into a public scandal? You dragged her name into this when you decided to ignore her last will and testament, I replied firmly. Martin leaned toward his father, whispering something in his ear. He nodded slowly, keeping his gaze on me. We need time to review these documents, he said at last, and to discuss our next steps. Time is short, Brooke replied. The transfer of ownership is scheduled for Friday. If you don't cancel the deal voluntarily, we'll have to get a restraining order. Abby, he called, can I talk to you for a minute? Brooke gave me a questioning look, but I nodded, indicating that everything was fine. When we were alone, my father stared at me for a long time, as if trying to figure out who this woman was. Are you really ready to sue me? He finally asked, after everything I've done for you? And were you really ready to sell the last memory of my mother behind my back? I retorted, and give me the miserable crumbs from the deal? He didn't answer. He just pursed his lips and walked out, leaving me with the feeling that the battle was just beginning. But for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of this battle. I was ready to fight for the house, for my mother's memory, and for myself. The trial was scheduled for the end of the month. While Brooke worked on the evidence, I tried to understand what was happening to my father. His company, Tate Construction, always seemed to be doing well. But something told me it wasn't just his stubbornness or controlling nature. Abby, there's something you need to know, Brooke said when we met in her office on that rainy Tuesday. Her face was serious, and there was a thick folder of documents on her desk. I've been doing some financial research on your father's company. And what did you find? I asked, feeling unexplainably anxious. He's on the verge of bankruptcy. Brooke opened the folder, showing me the financial statements. He invested almost everything in a new complex on the west side of town, but he didn't get the necessary permits. I stared at the numbers, dumbfounded. This can't be right. He's always been successful? Yes, he was. Brooke nodded. But for the last 3 years, the company has been struggling to survive. And it was 3 months ago, when Veronica suggested selling the lake house, that the bank refused to give him another loan. The truth hit me like a wave on a rock. My father sold the house not because of Veronica's whim, not out of disrespect for my mother's memory. He was doing it to save his brainchild, the company he'd been building for 30 years. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Why didn't he just explain? Pride? Brooks suggested. Your father is not the type to admit weakness. I remembered his face in the office as he handed me the check. Tense, distant. Was it shame? Was it fear? Desperation disguised as indifference? There's something else, Brooke added, pulling out another document. I found it in the court records. Your parents filed for divorce 3 months before Mom's diagnosis. What? My voice broke. But they stayed together. Dad was there for her during her illness. Yeah, the papers were withdrawn a week after the diagnosis. Brooke gently placed her hand on mine. Abby, there's probably more to their relationship than you knew. That night I drove back to the lake house. I needed to be there, to think, to try to put the pieces of the truth together. Finn noticed the light and came in with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. You look like you need this, he said with a warm smile. We sat on the veranda, looking out over the dark lake, while I told him about my father's financial problems and the revelation of my parents' near divorce. Did you know about this? I asked. Finn took a sip of his wine, considering his answer. She didn't say anything directly about the divorce, but she talked a lot that summer about new beginnings, about second chances. Second chances? Yes, he nodded. Audrey said that her illness had made her reevaluate a lot of things. She talked about her plans after she got better writing a book, traveling. Did she believe she would get better? I whispered, feeling my heart ache. Yes and no. Finn looked at the water as if he saw a reflection of the past. She was realistic, but she also talked about life as if it would continue in you. She said you were her greatest treasure and the best continuation. Tears came to my eyes. Suddenly, I remembered that last evening with my mother on this very veranda. Her weak hand in mine, her eyes tired but calm. When I'm gone, don't let your father control your life, Abby. He's not doing it out of malice. He just doesn't know any other way to love. His father was the same way, demanding, harsh, incapable of showing tenderness. This chain of pain stretches across generations. But you can break it. Did she talk about my grandfather? I asked Finn. My father's father? Yes, he nodded. She told me how strict he was with Warren. No praise, just constant demands to be better, stronger, more successful. She said that your father never heard his father say, I'm proud of you, or I love you. Something clenched painfully in my chest. All my life I had been accusing my father of being cold, of being unable to show love. You know, Finn continued, she believed he loved you. In his own way, he just didn't know how to show it without control. I remembered how my father would sit by my mother's bedside in the hospital at night, holding her hand when he thought I couldn't see. How he cried at the funeral, the only time I ever saw him cry. How after her death he called me every Sunday, always ending the conversation with "take care," the closest thing to "I love you" he could say. Thank you for telling me. I turned to Finn. In the moonlight, his face seemed even more expressive, a strong jawline, kind eyes, light stubble. What are neighbors for? He smiled, and I felt something warm spread through my chest. The next day, we met with the buyers of the lake house, the Gardners. Jeffrey Gardner was a successful surgeon, and his wife, Elaine, was a famous interior designer. They were nice, intelligent people who really fell in love with the house. "We understand your situation, Miss Tate," Elaine said when Brooke explained the problem with the will. "But we've already planned the renovations and hired contractors. Our kids are excited about the prospect of a summer at the lake." "We paid a fair price," Jeffrey added, his voice calm but firm. "And while we sympathize with your situation, we're not willing to walk away from the purchase." Brooke gave me a warning look, not to talk about a lawsuit, but I already knew the Gardners wouldn't back down willingly. And could I blame them? They didn't know about the will, about Mom's wishes. For them, it was just a bargain to buy a great piece of real estate. After the meeting, Brooke did not hide her concern. "The Gardners hired a lawyer, Preston King. He's the best in real estate," she sighed. "Abby, this could take years. Even with the will in hand, the court could find them bona fide purchasers." "But he knew about the will," I protested. "He hid it." "And that needs to be proven," Brooke rubbed her temples. "We need evidence that he saw the will, that he knew what it contained. Right now, it's your word against his." I could feel my temper fading. Was it all for nothing? Would I never get my mother's house back? That evening, my father unexpectedly arrived at my apartment. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. Sagging, with dark circles under his eyes, he looked 10 years older. "Can I come in?" he asked, and I silently stepped back, letting him in. We sat down in my small living room. My father was nervously twirling his wedding ring, a habit that remained with him even after his divorce and remarriage. "I take it you found out about the financial problems," he began without preamble. "Yes, and that you and Mom had planned to divorce before she got sick." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I didn't sell the house because of Veronica's money," he said quietly. "Even though she really wanted to for a long time, I needed the money to save the company." "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" I asked. "Why didn't you explain the situation?" "And what would you have done?" He looked up at me, tired. "Would you have given the money to me?" I wanted to say yes, but was it the truth? Would I have been able to part with my last material connection to my mother to help my father, who had kept me at a distance all my life? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But you had to give me a chance to decide." He was silent for a long time, as if collecting his thoughts. "I knew about the will," he finally admitted. "I found it among her things after the funeral." My heart was pounding so hard that I thought he must hear it. "Why did you hide it? Why didn't you give me the house like she wanted?" "At first," he sighed, "I was angry at first. She changed the will without my knowledge. The house was registered in my name, even though it was bought with her money. I felt that she had betrayed me." "Betrayed?" I couldn't believe my ears. "Mom never." "No, not in that sense." He shook his head. "But we stayed together after her diagnosis. I refused to get a divorce. I was by her side until the end, and she still didn't trust me, changed her will secretly." There was real pain in his voice, and suddenly I saw the situation from the other side. Their marriage was falling apart. They were planning to divorce. But when the illness came, my father stayed, perhaps out of a sense of duty, perhaps out of love, which was still glowing under the ashes of disappointment. "And then," he continued, "the house became the only thing that connected us with you. You barely spoke to me after she died. You came to the obligatory dinners once a month, answered the phone, but there was a gap between us. I was afraid that if I gave you the house, I would lose my last connection with you." I looked at him. This strong, stubborn man whom I had been afraid to disappoint all my life, and for the first time I saw his vulnerability, his fear, his loneliness. And now? I asked quietly. Now you've sold it, and there's not just a gap between us, but an open war. I didn't think you'd find the will, he admitted. I figured I could sell the house, save the company, and give you enough money for a down payment on a place of your own. 14,000? I couldn't help but smile bitterly. At least he had the decency to look ashamed. Veronica thought it was enough. Of course, Veronica. A woman who had always seen me as an obstacle, an uncomfortable reminder of my father's first marriage. So what now? My father asked. The Gardners won't back down. They have a good lawyer. Even with a will, it's gonna be a long, messy affair. I looked out the window at the evening city, feeling my anger gradually give way to something else, a mixture of understanding, fatigue, and sadness. My father was a broken man who didn't know how to love openly, who didn't know how to trust, who didn't know how to ask for help. He hid his vulnerability behind a mask of control, just as I hid my pain behind a mask of complacence. We were mirrors of each other. We just didn't notice it. I don't know, I answered honestly. He stood up, looking even more tired than when he came in. I realize that you hate me right now, he said quietly, and you have a right to. But know that I never meant to hurt you. When the door closed behind him, I picked up the phone and dialed Finn's number. I needed to talk to someone who understood what that house meant to me, who knew my mother in her last days. The Gardners won't back down, I said when he picked up the phone, and my father is on the verge of bankruptcy. Come to the lake, Finn replied. I think it's better to think where your mind is at peace. And I knew he was right. The lake house had always been a place where everything fell into place. Perhaps there I would find the answer to how to untie this knot, to preserve my mother's legacy without destroying everything my father had worked for and without taking away the dream from innocent buyers. The day of the trial was surprisingly sunny, as if nature itself was mocking the gloom of the case. The courtroom was filled with people, my father's and my lawyers, the Gardners with their representative, Veronica in an ivory business suit that made her look like a bird of prey. Finn sat in the back row, supporting me with his presence. Judge Morris, an elderly woman with penetrating eyes, listened intently to the opening statements of the lawyers. Brooke was brilliant. She clearly laid out the facts, presented the will, Aunt Peyton's testimony, and additional documents confirming that the house had been bought with her mother's money. The father's lawyer insisted that the Gardners were bona fide buyers who should not suffer because of family misunderstandings. He skillfully avoided the question of whether Warren knew about the will. When it came to the testimony, my father struggled to get up from his seat. His face was pale, and dark shadows lay under his eyes. Mr. Tate, were you aware of the existence of your late wife's will at the time of the sale of the house? The judge asked. The room held its breath. Yes, Your Honor, my father answered, and a quiet whisper spread through the room. I found the will among my wife's belongings shortly after she died. I felt Brooke squeeze my hand under the table. This was a direct admission of concealing the will, an offense that could have serious consequences. And you knowingly withheld this document from your daughter? Judge Morris looked at him over the top of her glasses. Yes. His voice sounded tired but firm, at first out of anger. Audrey changed the will secretly without discussing it with me, even though the house was technically in my name. Later, he was silent for a moment, searching for words. I was afraid of losing the last connection with my daughter. Explain, the judge asked. After Audrey's death, Abby withdrew from me. I realized that it was my fault. I was never a good father. I didn't know how to show my feelings. The lake house was... He took a deep breath. The only reason she still kept in touch with me. I was afraid that if I gave her the house, I would lose my daughter forever. I felt tears filling my eyes. For the first time in my life, my father spoke openly about his feelings, publicly acknowledging his fears. And the sale of the house? The judge continued. My company was on the verge of bankruptcy. He now looked in front of him. I needed money to save the business I had worked on all my life. But instead of having an honest conversation with my daughter, suddenly he grabbed his chest, his face distorted in pain. Dad! I jumped up from my seat as he staggered and fell to his knees. The room exploded with voices. The judge called for medical assistance. I rushed to my father, supporting him. His face was gray and his breathing was ragged. Abby, he whispered, squeezing my hand. I'm sorry. I'll fix everything. An ambulance took him away with a diagnosis of heart attack. The court hearing was postponed indefinitely. I spent the next 2 weeks between the hospital and consultations with Brooke. My father underwent bypass surgery. The operation was successful, but the doctors insisted on complete rest for several months. It's Providence, Aunt Peyton said as we sat in the hospital cafeteria. Sometimes we need to look into the face of death to see what's really important. My father changed after that day in court. He became quieter, more thoughtful. One evening, when we were alone in the ward, he asked me to sit next to him. I've found a solution, Abby, he said, his voice weak but determined. If you agree. It turned out that my father had offered the Gardners financial compensation for the delay in transferring the house to give us time to find a compromise solution. The Gardners, shocked by the dramatic events in court, agreed. I can't give the lake house back, my father said, looking at me with an open, vulnerable look I'd never seen before. The deal is done, and the Gardners have the right to the property. But I can offer you full compensation, $2 million, not a paltry $14,000. I listened in silence, not interrupting. And there's something else, he continued. I have a piece of land on the same side of the lake, half a kilometer from ours, from your former house, 5 acres with access to the water. I've owned it for 10 years. I bought it to expand our property, but your mother didn't want another house. You want to give me this land? I asked. Not just give it to you, he smiled faintly. I want to help you build something new there, something that will be your own project. You once mentioned that you dreamed of creating a center for palliative care patients, where they could spend their last days in a beautiful, peaceful place. I held my breath. It was a dream of mine that I rarely spoke about out loud. The idea of a center where terminally ill people could spend their last days in dignity, overlooking nature, not hospital walls. I had expressed this idea to my father only once, in passing, during one of our rare conversations after my mother's death. You remember that? I whispered. I was always listening, Abby. His eyes shone with unshed tears. I just didn't know how to show what I was hearing. That night I told Finn about my father's proposal. We were sitting on the shore of the lake, not far from the land he was talking about. It sounds like the perfect solution, Finn said, throwing pebbles into the water. You'll get compensation for the house, new land, and the opportunity to create something important. But it's not the same, I sighed. It's not my mother's house. No, he agreed. Developing her legacy, not just preserving it? I looked at him in surprise. What do you mean? Your mother created a place of healing for herself and for you on this lake. Finn looked at me warmly. Now you can create a place of healing for others. You can continue what she started, but in your own way. His words touched something deep inside me. Perhaps my mother's true legacy was not in the walls of the house, but in what she taught me: compassion, strength, the ability to find beauty even in the darkest of times. I can see this center, Finn said, looking at the site. Bright rooms with large windows overlooking the lake, a garden where patients could sit in the sun, maybe even a little pier so they can be closer to the water. You say that like you can already picture it, I smiled. Because I can, he turned to me. Abby, I'm an architect. Have you ever wondered why I bought a house on the lake? I work from home, designing buildings for people all over the country. It was a surprise. In all our conversations, Finn had never mentioned his profession. Could you? I hesitated, but he finished my thought. Design your center? Yes, I could. His eyes shone with enthusiasm. What's more, I'd like to be a part of this project. A partner, if you don't mind. A partner? I repeated, feeling my heart speed up. Yes, he took my hand. Not just in the center, in everything, Abby. 3 months later, I stood on the hill of the new site. The morning fog was slowly clearing over the lake, revealing the shimmering surface of the water. In my hands, I held a photo of my mother, the one from the pier, where we smile with our hair blowing in the wind. The earthworks have already begun. The foundation of the Audrey Palliative Care Center was laid last week. Finn designed a beautiful project, a building that seemed to grow out of the landscape, with large windows and terraces facing the lake. My father gradually recovered. His company survived thanks to an unexpected investor, his Aunt Peyton, who invested the proceeds from the sale of her business. She and my father suddenly found a common language, united by a desire to support me. Veronica filed for divorce when it became clear that my father had reconsidered his priorities and no longer put business first. He didn't resist. It seemed to bring him relief. The Gardners became our friends. Elaine offered to help with the interior of the center, and Jeffrey, as a surgeon, became a medical consultant. You look happy, Finn's voice interrupted my thoughts. I am, I replied, leaning against him, although sometimes I still miss my old house. That's okay, he kissed my temple. But look at what you're creating here. Something new but connected to the past. A bridge between your mother's legacy and your own vision. I looked at the photo in my hands, then at the lake, which glistened in the morning sun. My mother's words from her diary suddenly sounded in my head. Windy Cove has become my refuge. Now I was creating a new haven, not only for myself, but for those who needed it most. Last week, for the first time since his heart attack, I met with my father alone, without doctors and lawyers around. We talked for a long time. We really talked, perhaps for the first time in our lives, about my mother, about our fears, about his childhood with an abusive father, about my attempts to earn his approval. I've never been able to show you how much I love you, he said then, his voice trembling with unshed tears. But I've always loved you, Abby. Always. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the years of alienation and pain. What are you thinking about? Finn asked, bringing me back to the present. Bridges, I smiled, turning to him. How we build them between the past and the future. Between pain and healing. I looked at the photo one last time before slipping it into my pocket. My mother wanted freedom for me. Freedom from my father's control, from the fear of disappointment, from the need to always be a good girl. Now, standing on this earth with a man who saw and loved the real me, I finally felt that freedom. Finn took my hand, and we walked down the hill to where the workers had already begun to build the walls of the future center. I knew that there was still a lot of work to be done, not only with the construction, but also with rebuilding my relationship with my father, building a new life with Finn, and the process of forgiveness for myself and others. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. From the shores of the past to the new shores of the future, carrying with me not the bitterness of loss, but precious lessons of love,